I wasn't supposed to be in that room. He was a janitor, a maintenance worker in gray coveralls pushing a cart through a ballroom full of people who earned more in an hour than he did in a year. But Grant Mercer stopped walking the moment he saw her. A little girl sitting completely still at a table full of laughing strangers, counting chandelier lights with her finger because nobody had spoken a single word to her all night. Her mother owned the building, her mother owned the entire company, and her daughter was disappearing right in front of 60 people who never once looked down. If this story already has you feeling something, you're in the right place. We tell stories here that remind you what actually matters. Stories about people who show up when nobody else does. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now and turn on your notifications, because we post new stories every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. And while you're here, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. The Christmas Gala at Halstead Capitol was the kind of event that existed mostly to prove it could exist. $300,000 in decorations. A 20-piece orchestra tucked into the corner of a ballroom that took up the entire 42nd floor of a midtown Manhattan tower. Champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's car payments. And 60 of the most powerful financial minds in New York City standing around in tuxedos and gowns, congratulating one another on a year that had made them all considerably richer. It was, by every external measure, a spectacular evening. Serena Halstead moved through it like she'd been born doing exactly this, which, in a way, she had. She was 30 years old, though most people assumed older when they first met her across a boardroom table. There was something in the way she held herself, something in the steadiness of her eyes, that made people recalibrate quickly. She wasn't warm in the way people expected rich women to be warm. She wasn't cold either. She was precise, measured. The kind of woman who listened to an entire pitch before asking the one question that unraveled it. Halstead Capital managed just over $4 billion in assets. Serena had built the last $2 billion herself, starting at 23 with her late father's name and a brokerage that was bleeding out. She'd stopped the bleeding. Then she'd grown the thing into something her father wouldn't have recognized. Tonight, she wore a deep navy dress, her dark hair pinned back, a single strand of pearls at her collarbone. She moved from cluster to cluster of executives, laughing at the right moments, remembering the names of wives and children, deflecting questions about Q1 projections with a smile that said not tonight without ever saying it. She was extraordinarily good at this. She had also not checked on Mia in nearly 40 minutes. That fact arrived somewhere in the middle of a conversation about emerging markets, landing quietly at the back of her mind. She filed it away, finished the conversation, accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing tray. Then she looked across the ballroom toward the far end of the long center table, where she had seated Mia with a coloring book, a tablet loaded with her favorite shows, and a plate of food that probably sat untouched. She found Mia immediately. Her daughter was exactly where she'd left her, small and contained at the far end of the table, surrounded by the noise and movement of people who didn't know she was there. The coloring book was closed. The tablet was dark. Mia sat with her hands folded in her lap, her chin slightly tilted upward, and she was counting. Serena recognized the behavior. Mia did it when she was working very hard to disappear inside herself. She found something fixed, a pattern on the ceiling, tiles on a floor, lights on a chandelier, and she counted them slowly, one by one, because counting kept the loneliness from becoming something heavier. 8 years old, profoundly deaf since the age of 2, when a severe infection had taken the hearing that would never come back. Mia Halstead had spent 6 years learning to navigate a world that communicated in a language her body couldn't access, and she had gotten extraordinarily good at being quiet about how hard that was. Serena watched her daughter count chandelier lights. She told herself she'd go over in a few minutes. She told herself Mia was fine. She turned back toward her guests. Grant Mercer had been working the building for 11 months. He was 37, though he looked like a man who'd gotten slightly more weather than 37 years typically provided. Not beaten exactly, but seasoned in a way that suggested he'd spent a significant portion of his life outdoors and under pressure. His hands were wide and calloused. His posture was a habit, not a performance. He didn't slouch against walls when he worked. He didn't shuffle. He moved with the particular economy of someone who had once been very well trained and had never entirely lost it. The maintenance crew for the Halstead Capitol Tower rotated through the building's event spaces during large functions, not to interact with guests, but to stay ahead of the inevitable: a dropped glass, a clogged drain in the adjacent restroom, a door that stuck, a light fixture that chose the worst possible moment to fail. Grant had drawn the ballroom rotation tonight, which meant he spent the evening maneuvering his cart through the service entrance, working the periphery, making himself essentially invisible to 60 people who wouldn't have registered him anyway. He was good at invisible. He'd been good at a lot of things that no longer applied to his current life. He worked the far wall near the kitchen access corridor, checking the baseboard heating unit that facilities had flagged 2 days ago. It was running hotter than it should on one end. Not a crisis, but the kind of thing that became a crisis if you ignored it through a New York winter. He crouched beside it, ran a hand along the vent, made a note on the work order clipped to his cart. When he stood, his sight line cleared the edge of the crowd. That was when he saw her. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't feel something mystical move through him. He simply saw a child sitting alone at a table full of adults, and something in the picture didn't sit right. He watched for a moment, long enough to observe that nobody at the table had spoken to her, long enough to notice that the adults nearest to her, 2 men in dark suits, deep in conversation, were physically turned away, shoulders angled outward, as though the small girl behind them was a piece of furniture they'd unconsciously decided not to face. He watched her raise her finger, watched her point it, almost imperceptibly, toward the chandelier above. She was counting. Grant knew that behavior. He recognized it the way you recognize the face of someone you loved in a crowd. Instantly, physically, before your brain had finished processing what your eyes had seen. Tyler did the same thing in waiting rooms, in restaurants where the table was loud and nobody was including him, in school hallways before he'd found his friends. Tyler would find a fixed point and count toward it, quietly, as though the numbers were a small rope he could hold on to. Grant looked at the girl more carefully. He watched a server place a bread basket directly behind her. The basket landed with an audible thump on the table surface. The 2 men in suits both glanced at the sound without missing a beat in their conversation. The girl didn't turn, she didn't flinch, didn't shift, didn't look up from the chandelier. Grant went very still. He thought, she didn't hear it. He thought, she can't hear any of this. He left his cart where it stood. He had to cross most of the ballroom to reach her, which meant moving through the crowd in his maintenance coveralls, while 60 people in formal wear parted around him without making eye contact. It was the kind of walk that would have bothered him once. It hadn't bothered him in years. He reached the far end of the table. He didn't pull out a chair. He didn't loom over her. He crouched, dropping himself down to her eye level, the same way he'd been doing with Tyler since Tyler was old enough to look up at him and feel the difference. The girl's eyes came down from the chandelier. She saw him. A man in gray coveralls crouched in front of her at a Christmas party, looking at her with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't performance. Just attention. The kind that didn't have somewhere else to be. She waited. Grant raised his right hand. Index finger bent, touched to his thumb, raised near his chin, brought outward. The letter H folded into a shape she would know. Then he moved the hand in a small wave. Hello. It wasn't perfect ASL. His signing had a roughness to it, a working man's fluency, learned over years of late nights after Tyler went to bed, YouTube tutorials and community classes, and a patient teacher at the Deaf Center in Brooklyn who had told him, more than once, that he had good hands for it. He wasn't a professional interpreter, but he was real. Mia's face changed. It happened the way a light comes on in a room that's been dark. Sudden, total, unmistakable. The careful blankness she'd been wearing fell away. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth came open. She signed back, fast. You know sign? Grant smiled. His hands came up again. A little. My son is deaf. His name is Tyler. Her whole body leaned forward. She was on the edge of her chair. How old is Tyler? 9. You? 8. Almost 9. Almost 9 is basically 9. She laughed. It was a soundless laugh, the movement of her shoulders, the shape of her mouth. And it was the most unguarded thing Grant had seen in this entire room all evening. He settled onto one knee, the formal floor cold through the fabric of his work pants, and let his hands tell her that Tyler loved basketball, but was terrible at it, that they had a dog named Biscuit who was not allowed on the furniture but was always on the furniture, that Tyler's favorite food was lasagna, and he would eat it cold for breakfast if Grant didn't watch him. Mia told him her name, told him that she had a favorite book about a girl who trained horses, that she didn't like the champagne smell at this party, but she liked the chandelier, that counting the lights helped when it was too crowded and she couldn't talk to anyone. Does that happen a lot? Grant signed. Not being able to talk to anyone? She looked at him for a moment. Honest, the way children were honest when they decided someone could be trusted. At grown-up places. Usually, yes. Serena saw it from across the room. She had excused herself from a conversation with two fund managers, intending to circle back to Mia, and what she found when she looked toward her daughter's seat stopped her mid-step. There was a man crouched in front of Mia's chair, a man in maintenance coveralls, and Mia was laughing. Serena's first instinct, quick and instinctive and slightly embarrassing, was alarm. A stranger crouched in front of her child at a private company event. Her eyes swept the room for her head of security, Marcus, who was posted near the main entrance. Then she registered what she was actually seeing. The man's hands were moving, and Mia's hands were moving back. Serena had spent 8 years watching her daughter try to exist in rooms full of people who didn't know sign language. She knew what Mia looked like when she was tolerating a situation. She knew what Mia looked like when someone was making genuine contact with her. She had never seen Mia look like this with a stranger. There was a brightness in her daughter's face that Serena associated with very specific things. The sign language tutor Mia adored, her two best friends from the deaf school in Chelsea, Sunday afternoons when it was just the two of them, and Serena wasn't distracted by work. And now this man in gray coveralls crouched on the formal floor of a $300,000 Christmas party, signing about a dog named Biscuit. Serena crossed the room. She moved carefully, not wanting to interrupt whatever was happening, not sure what she was walking into. When she reached the end of the table, both Mia and the man noticed her at the same moment. Mia's hands moved immediately. "Mama, he knows sign. His son is deaf like me. His dog eats lasagna." The man straightened, unfolding to his full height, which was considerably more height than Serena had expected. He was easily 6'2". He looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read. Not nervous exactly, but careful. The expression of someone who understood they'd done something unusual and was prepared to explain it simply. "I'm sorry," he said. "She was sitting alone. I noticed she couldn't hear the room." His voice was quieter than she'd expected too, even without being flat. Serena looked at him, then at Mia, who was watching the two adults with the sharp attention of someone who was very good at reading a situation she couldn't hear. "She's been sitting there for 40 minutes, Serena said. She hadn't meant it as an accusation toward him. She understood immediately, from the slight shift in his expression, that it had landed as an accusation toward herself. He didn't say anything to that. "What's your name?" Serena asked. "Grant Mercer, building maintenance." "You sign fluently?" A slight hesitation. "Functionally, my son is deaf. Tyler, he's 9. He glanced at Mia. "She mentioned she's almost 9. "Almost 9 is basically 9, Serena said. Something shifted in his face. The corner of his mouth moved. "That's what I told her." Serena looked at her daughter. Mia was watching Grant with an expression Serena recognized as something close to attachment. The look of a child who had found an unexpected anchor and wasn't quite ready to let go of it. "Thank you," Serena said, "for noticing her." He nodded once, straightforward, without performance. She wasn't hard to notice. He picked up his cart handle. He looked at Mia, raised one hand and signed, "I'll see you around." Mia signed back, both hands fast and emphatic. "Tell Tyler I said his dog sounds perfect." Grant smiled. A real one this time, not polite, not careful. It changed his face entirely. He nodded at Serena once more and moved back toward the perimeter of the room with the same quiet efficiency he'd arrived with, disappearing into the crowd within moments. Serena sat down in the chair beside Mia. Mia immediately began telling her everything. About Tyler, about Biscuit, about Grant's imperfect but genuine signing, about the way he'd looked at her like she was simply someone worth talking to. Serena listened to her daughter's flying hands and tried to keep up with the vocabulary, and knew she was missing words and hated that she was missing words. Across the ballroom, the orchestra was playing. 60 executives were networking. $300,000 of decorations sparkled overhead. Serena sat beside her daughter and felt, with a clarity that was almost physical, the weight of what she had been missing. She thought about a man in gray coveralls who had crossed a room full of important people to crouch on the floor in front of one small girl. She thought, who is he? She thought, I want to know everything. She reached across the table and took Mia's hand. Her daughter kept signing with her free hand, and for the rest of the evening, Serena did not leave her side. The Monday after the gala, Serena did something she almost never did. She used her access. It wasn't something she was proud of exactly. She told herself it was due diligence, the same instinct that made her run background checks on business partners and read the footnotes of every financial disclosure before signing anything. She told herself it was reasonable. A stranger had spent 20 minutes alone with her daughter at a private company event. Of course, she wanted to know who he was. She called Marcus, her head of security, at 8 in the morning. The maintenance worker from Friday night, she said. The one who was at the far end of the ballroom around 9 o'clock. I need his full name and employment record. Marcus came back to her within the hour. Grant Allen Mercer, 37, hired 11 months prior through the building's contracted facilities management company. Clean record. No flags. Prior employment history included a gap of several years listed simply as military service, followed by a series of jobs that didn't immediately connect. A logistics coordinator position in Virginia, a part-time instructor role at a community center in New Jersey, a year working for a private security firm that he'd left after 8 months, then maintenance work, first in Queens, then the Halstead Capitol Tower. Marcus added, almost as an afterthought, decorated Navy SEAL, Ms. Halstead. Multiple deployments, left the service about 6 years ago. I'd guess the gap in civilian employment history tracks with a transition period. It's not uncommon. Serena sat with that for a moment. She had spent the weekend thinking about a man who'd crossed a ballroom to crouch in front of her daughter. She had not been picturing a decorated Navy SEAL. She thanked Marcus and set the file aside. Then she spent the better part of Monday morning telling herself she wasn't going to do anything with the information. He was a building employee. She was the owner of the building. There was a professional distance that existed for very good reasons, and she was a woman who respected professional distance. By Tuesday afternoon, she had arranged for Mia to visit the tower after school. She told herself it was so Mia could sketch in the lobby. Mia loved architecture, loved drawing columns and archways and the way light moved through glass. She told herself it had nothing to do with the maintenance schedule, which she had absolutely not checked, and which absolutely did not show Grant Mercer assigned to the 42nd floor on Tuesday afternoons. Mia spent 20 minutes sketching in the lobby before she started signing about the chandelier upstairs and whether the man from the party was working today. We can go up and check, Serena said, keeping her voice even. They went up. Grant was at the far end of the corridor outside the main conference room, crouched beside an electrical panel with a flashlight between his teeth and a voltage tester in one hand. He heard the elevator and looked up. He saw Serena first, and his expression did the thing it had done on Friday. Careful, measured, prepared to explain himself simply. Then he saw Mia. His face did something different then. He pulled the flashlight from his teeth, clicked it off, and raised one hand. Hey, almost 9. Mia lit up like he'd handed her something. Her hands flew. I told my mom everything about Tyler, and she wants to know if he actually eats cold lasagna for breakfast. Grant looked at Serena. She's asking about the lasagna, Serena said. I know. He looked back at Mia. He prefers it with hot sauce. I don't ask questions anymore. Mia dissolved into that soundless laugh. She signed something back that Serena caught only part of. Something about hot sauce being wrong, and Grant responded, and within 40 seconds they were fully mid-conversation, and Serena was standing 2 feet away, catching maybe one word in 3, which was approximately the ratio she managed on her best days. That ratio had been bothering her for years. She watched her daughter's face while Mia talked to this man. The openness of it, the animation, the total absence of the careful self-containment Mia wore in rooms full of hearing people who meant well but couldn't reach her. And Serena felt something she hadn't expected to feel, something that had nothing to do with gratitude or even guilt. She felt something close to grief, not for what Mia had lost, for what she herself had failed to build. She asked him directly 2 days later. She'd thought about how to do it and decided that any version that felt strategic or corporate would be wrong. So she simply went downstairs to the maintenance bay at the end of his shift on Thursday, knocked on the open door and said, I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes if you have time. He had changed out of his coveralls, dark jeans, a gray Henley. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who had learned not to assume the nature of a conversation before it started. "Sure," he said. They stood in the hallway because it was the closest available space, which wasn't ideal but felt, in a strange way, more honest than asking him to a conference room she owned. "How did you learn ASL?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment as though deciding how much of a real answer to give. Then he apparently decided on the real one. Tyler was diagnosed when he was 2.5. I was still active duty. His mother and I we'd already been falling apart for about a year by then. He paused, not with discomfort exactly, but with the particular care of someone choosing accurate language. She left when he was 3. It was a combination of things, the deployments, the marriage not surviving them. And she wasn't prepared for what raising a deaf child actually required. I don't say that as a criticism. It was the truth. "So you left the Navy?" "Not immediately. I had another deployment and then I got out. Tyler spent those months with my sister in Maryland, which was not a perfect situation, but it was the best available option." He said it matter-of-factly, the way people talked about hard things they'd already processed. "When I got back and got him, I started learning. Classes, tutors, a community center in Brooklyn that had a strong program. I was not a good student at first. I was impatient with myself, which made me tense. And tension is the worst possible thing when you're learning a physical language." "What changed?" Tyler started correcting me. Something moved across his face. He was 4. His hands were faster than mine by the time he was 5. He'd watch me sign something and then show me the right way, very patiently, like I was the child. That kind of feedback from your kid. He stopped, started again. "You figure out pretty quickly that your ego doesn't belong in it." Serena was quiet for a moment. "Mia corrects me too," she said. "I've been learning for 4 years and she still corrects me." He looked at her. Not with pity. With something more like recognition. "Are you consistent with it?" She started to say yes and stopped. "I'm consistent when I remember to be. I use interpreters for her school meetings and her medical appointments because it's faster, more reliable. I tell myself it's in her best interest to have accurate communication." Grant didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The accuracy of what she'd just admitted was sitting plainly between them. "That's the comfortable answer," she said. "I know." "I'm not judging you," he said. "I just know that kids feel the difference between someone who outsources and someone who tries, even when the trying is imperfect." "Tyler knows the difference?" "Tyler once told me that the thing he liked best about me was that I talked to him wrong." He paused. "He meant I made mistakes, but I didn't stop. He was 8 when he said that. I didn't know whether to feel insulted or—" He made a slight gesture with one hand, something between a shrug and an acknowledgement. I decided to take it as what it was. "What was it?" "The best compliment he'd ever given me." Hut. The first time Mia and Tyler met was a Saturday in late January, at a public park in Carroll Gardens that split the difference between Serena's address in Tribeca and Grant's apartment in the Slope. It was Serena's suggestion. Grant had agreed with the straightforward decisiveness she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. Not impulsive, not overthought, just, "Yes, that makes sense. Let's do it." She had been anxious about it in a way she didn't fully admit to herself until she was standing at the park entrance watching a 9-year-old boy in a green jacket lope ahead of his father toward the open grass, a soccer ball tucked under one arm, and the most unself-conscious energy she'd seen in a child in years. Mia was holding Serena's hand. She did that still sometimes, in new situations. Not because she needed reassurance, she would have said, but because she was surveying things first, taking stock, deciding what she thought before she committed to anything. Then Tyler spotted Mia. He stopped walking. His hands came up and he signed, "Are you Mia? My dad said you said my dog sounds perfect." Mia dropped Serena's hand so fast it was almost comical. She signed back, "He does sound perfect." "What color is he, brown and white?" "He has one ear that goes up and one ear that goes down. That's the best kind of dog." Tyler considered this with the gravity of someone weighing a serious proposition. Then he nodded once, clearly satisfied, and held out the soccer ball. "Do you know how to play?" "No." A pause. Then Mia's hand, slightly smaller than his. "Will you teach me?" Tyler glanced back at his father, then at Serena, in the way children did when they wanted adults to understand that their presence was now optional. "We'll be over there," Grant said, gesturing toward a bench near the path. Tyler was already trotting toward the open grass. Mia followed immediately. No hesitation, no looking back. Within 2 minutes, they were kicking the ball between them with varying degrees of accuracy, signing at each other between passes, Tyler periodically stopping to demonstrate something, and Mia watching with the focused attention she gave to things she'd decided she wanted to master. Serena sat down on the bench. Grant sat down a few feet away. They watched their children. "He's a good kid," Serena said. "He has his moments." Grant's voice was dry, affectionate. "He told his teacher last week that the classroom noise level was aggressively unhelpful. She called me. I had to explain that he comes by that kind of language honestly." Serena laughed. Actually laughed, not the polished version she deployed at galas. Mia told her violin instructor that the piece he'd chosen was emotionally limited, and she'd prefer something with more complexity. How old was she? 7. Grant was quiet for a moment. "They're going to get along terrifyingly well." "That is my exact concern," Serena said. He smiled at that, the real one, the one that changed his whole face. And they settled into a comfortable silence that Serena realized, about 10 minutes into it, was the most comfortable silence she'd experienced in company in longer than she could remember. The park visits became bi-weekly, then weekly. By mid-February, they had settled into a rhythm that nobody had formally proposed. Saturday afternoons at the park when the weather allowed. Sunday dinners when it didn't. The Sunday dinners happened at Grant's apartment, which had established itself as the default venue, partly because Tyler lobbied aggressively for it, and partly because Grant cooked actual food, which Serena's kitchen, staffed by a personal chef 5 days a week, and abandoned the other 2, could not reliably produce. The apartment was in Park Slope, second floor of a brownstone, with 3 rooms and a kitchen that was about 2/3 the size of Serena's closet. It was loud in the way that small spaces with children were loud, not with sound exactly, but with presence. Tyler's basketball posters competed with Mia's impromptu drawings that had started appearing on the refrigerator door. Biscuit, brown, white, one ear up, one ear down, exactly as advertised, treated every new visitor as a personal gift from the universe and expressed this through the application of considerable weight directly to their laps. Mia, at the first Sunday dinner she attended, sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor and let Biscuit lick her face for approximately 4 minutes straight. This was the most undignified Serena had ever seen her daughter, and also, unambiguously, the happiest. Grant made lasagna that first Sunday. "He's making it for you," Tyler informed Mia, signing rapidly while Grant's back was turned. "He Googled whether lasagna was good for new people." "He Googled it?" "He has a whole list. He makes lists for everything." Mia looked at Serena with an expression that said, "I like this man." Serena, who was sitting on a stool at the kitchen counter, trying to follow the conversation between the children, while also watching Grant navigate a kitchen clearly designed for someone considerably shorter than 6'2", looked back at her daughter with an expression that said, "I know, don't." She was not entirely sure what she meant by the don't. She filed it away. The lasagna was good. Not technically perfect. The edges were slightly overdone and Grant knew it, ate around them without comment. But it was the kind of food that filled a room with warmth, and the 4 of them sat at a kitchen table that was only supposed to seat 3 and ate until Tyler declared he needed a full 20 minutes of recovery before he could consider moving. "You've had worse ideas," Grant told him. "Name one." "The skateboard." Tyler's expression shifted into dignified offense. "That was an accident." "You went down the front steps on it." "I underestimated the angle." "You underestimated gravity." Mia was watching the exchange with sharp attention, catching most of it, leaning toward Serena occasionally so Serena could clarify a word she'd missed. And Serena, trying to bridge the conversation for her daughter while also watching it, realized she was the slowest person at the table, the least fluent, the person with the most catching up to do. That realization had been sitting in her chest for weeks. Tonight it had weight. After dinner, while Tyler showed Mia his room and Biscuit conducted his customary post-dinner patrol of the apartment, Serena stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes because she'd needed something to do with her hands. Grant came to stand beside her, gathering dishes from the table. "You okay?" he said. She didn't answer immediately. "I didn't know I was this behind," she said. With her. With the language. I thought I was managing it reasonably. I thought the tutors and the interpreters were. I thought I was handling it. You were, he said. That's different from being in it. She laughs differently here than she does at home. She kept her eyes on the dishes. I didn't know that until about an hour ago. Grant set the plates down on the counter. He didn't tell her she was being too hard on herself. He didn't tell her she was doing her best. Those were the kinds of things people said when they wanted a conversation to become easier. And she had a feeling Grant Mercer had long since learned that easier wasn't always better. When Tyler was 5, he said, I took him to a specialist appointment in the city. Waited 6 months to get in, one of the best doctors in the country, supposed to be a comprehensive evaluation. And the doctor spent the whole appointment talking to me. About Tyler, in front of Tyler, like Tyler wasn't in the room. He paused. I didn't say anything. I sat there and took notes and let it happen because I didn't want to make it difficult. I thought he's the expert. This is how it works. What happened? On the way home, Tyler signed to me. Why didn't he talk to me? Just that. No anger, just a real question. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't have an answer, and I sat with that for a long time. The fact that I had let someone treat my son as if he weren't in the room, because it was easier for me not to say anything. Serena looked at him. The next specialist appointment, he said, I arrived with a written note that I gave to the doctor before it started. It said, this appointment is with my son. Please address him. I'll interpret. He picked up the plates again. She was great, actually. She just hadn't thought about it. But you had to tell her. Sometimes you have to say the thing out loud, he said. Even when it feels obvious, even when it's uncomfortable. Serena was quiet. She turned back to the sink. I'm going to start over with the ASL, she said. Properly. Not the fits and starts I've been doing, an actual structured program. Grant set the dishes beside her without comment. Then, Mia will notice within about a week. Will she think it's strange that I'm suddenly starting over? She'll think it's about time, he said, and she'll probably try to grade you. That's terrifying. Yeah, he said, it is. But he said it like it was also, at least slightly, something to look forward to. She found a program through the Deaf Community Center in Chelsea that Mia's school connected her with. Not a beginner class, but an intermediate intensive designed for hearing parents of deaf children who had picked up fragments over the years and needed to build actual structure underneath them. The class met 3 times a week. The instructor was a woman named Dara, 30 years deaf, 40 years impatient with people who expected fluency without work. The first class, Dara watched Serena sign a greeting and then looked at her with the particular expression of someone cataloging damage. You have good instincts, Dara said through an interpreter, and almost no grammar. We're going to fix that. She was not wrong. Serena's ASL had been assembled from necessity and love and a significant amount of guesswork over 8 years, and the grammar was a disaster. The hand shapes were mostly right, the vocabulary was functional in the narrow lanes she used most. But the spatial grammar that gave ASL its actual architecture was something she'd been gesturing around rather than building. She went home from the first class with homework and a headache. She practiced at her kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, facing her laptop camera, watching her own hands and feeling like an idiot. She made mistakes she couldn't fix fast enough. She forgot things she'd known for years and re-forgot them again. The second week, she asked Mia to sit with her while she practiced. Mia, 8 years old, took this responsibility with total seriousness. She sat across from her mother at the kitchen table with Serena's homework printout and her own set of opinions. Your hand shape for mother is wrong. Your fingers need to be more open. Like this? Mia tilted her head. Closer. Try again. Serena tried again. That's better. Not good, but better. Thank you. That's very encouraging. You're welcome. A pause. Do the one for remember again. You've been doing it backward. It wasn't a perfect system. Some nights Serena was too tired and her hand stopped working correctly, and she had to put it away before the frustration did something unhelpful. Some nights Mia lost patience and left the table, not in anger, but in the unsentimental way children abandon things that were taking too long. Some nights Serena sat alone at 11:30 and questioned what she was doing and why it had taken this long. But she kept going. Grant had not told her to do any of it. He hadn't suggested it or pushed it. He had said, Mia will notice within about a week. She was at week 3 when Mia, at breakfast on a Tuesday morning, signed something to Serena across the kitchen, and Serena signed back. Not perfectly, not with Dara's grammar approval, but fully, without stopping, without reaching for a different word because the right one was too hard to shape. Mia went very still. Then she signed, "You understood everything I said." "Most of it," Serena admitted. "You signed that right." A pause that felt enormous for an 8-year-old. "Are you practicing a lot?" "Every night." Mia looked at her mother for a moment in the direct way she had, the way that always made Serena feel like she was being read very accurately. Then she came around the kitchen counter and climbed onto the stool beside Serena and leaned against her shoulder. She didn't sign anything. She just leaned. Serena put her arm around her daughter and sat there in the quiet of a Tuesday morning, and she thought, this is what I was missing, not the vocabulary, the showing up. Grant found out about the classes 3 weeks in, when Tyler mentioned them. He mentioned them because Mia had told Tyler, and Tyler had told Grant in the particular way Tyler delivered important information, sideways, while focused on something else entirely. They were watching a basketball game on a Saturday afternoon, Mia and Tyler on the floor, with Biscuit, Serena and Grant on the couch, with the informal distance between them that they had stopped mentioning because mentioning it seemed to make it more complicated. Tyler, without looking up from the game, signed to his father. "Did you know Mia's mom is taking ASL classes 3 times a week?" Grant looked at Serena. Serena looked at the television. "Dara's program," she said, "at the Chelsea Center." He was quiet for a moment. "Dara's program is intermediate advanced." "I know. That's not an easy class." "I know that too." Another pause, then, "How's it going?" "She told me my grammar is a disaster and that I have good instincts." She kept her eyes on the screen. "I'm choosing to focus on the second part." He didn't say anything else about it that afternoon. But later, when Serena and Mia were getting ready to leave and they were all standing in the narrow hallway near the front door in the slightly awkward configuration that goodbyes always created in that apartment, Grant signed something to Mia. His hands were careful, deliberate. "Your mom is working very hard." Mia glanced at Serena, then back at Grant. "I know," she signed. "I'm helping her." "I know you are," he signed back. "She's lucky." Mia thought about this for a moment. Then her hands formed something that took Serena a second to parse. She caught the shape, ran it through what she was learning, came out with, "So are we." Grant looked at his daughter, then he looked at Serena. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Serena said goodnight and took Mia's hand and walked them out into the Brooklyn evening, down the brownstone steps and onto the sidewalk, where the cold air hit them both, and Mia immediately pressed close to Serena's side. They walked toward the car. The streetlights were yellow and warm above the bare trees. Mia slipped her hand into Serena's. Serena held it. She thought about a man standing in a narrow hallway, watching them leave, and about what it cost a person to keep showing up fully for people who needed them. The daily, unglamorous, unwitnessed cost of it. She thought about the 6 years Grant had spent building a life that fit what his son needed, the way he'd bent his own trajectory to meet Tyler's without making Tyler feel the weight of that bending. She thought about how badly she wanted to be that kind of parent. She thought about how she was only now figuring out that she hadn't been. It was not a comfortable thought. She had built an empire on the premise that she was exceptionally good at what she did, and she was. In every room that had ever asked something of her professionally, she had exceeded what was asked. She had taken her father's failing company and turned it into something formidable through sheer disciplined intelligence and the willingness to outwork everyone around her. But there had been a room she hadn't been working hard enough in. And the person in that room was 8 years old and had learned to count chandelier lights when she was lonely and had never once complained about it. Mia tugged her hand. Serena looked down. "What are you thinking about?" Mia signed with her free hand, the one not wrapped in Serena's. Serena considered lying, as parents did, and then decided against it. "I'm thinking about how I want to do better," she signed. Her grammar wasn't perfect. Her hand shapes needed work. But Mia watched every movement and understood everything. "Better than what?" Mia asked. "Better than I have been." Mia was quiet for a step or two. They reached the car. The driver was waiting, had the door open. Mia looked up at Serena with that unsettling, accurate look. "You're already better," she signed. Then she climbed into the car, and the moment moved on the way moments did, and Serena got in beside her daughter, and the car pulled out into Brooklyn traffic, and the lights of the borough slid past the windows. Serena didn't say anything for a while. She just sat next to Mia, their shoulders touching, the heat of the car surrounding them, and let herself feel the particular and necessary discomfort of a woman who had been very good at almost everything, learning at 30 years old to be better at the thing that mattered most. The call came in at 7:43 on a Wednesday morning in early March. Serena was in the back of her car, 40 blocks from the office, reviewing a term sheet on her tablet when her phone rang. It was Daniel Cho, her chief of staff, and the particular quality of his voice, clipped, precise, missing its usual Wednesday morning equilibrium, told her something had gone sideways before he said a single substantive word. "We have a problem with the Takeda meeting," he said. She set the tablet down. Hiroshi Takeda was 61 years old, the founder and principal director of Takeda Pacific Holdings, a Japanese investment group that had spent the last 18 months expanding aggressively into North American financial markets. He was profoundly deaf, had been since early childhood, and was known in international investment circles as a man with an exceptionally low tolerance for inefficiency, an exceptionally long memory for slights, and an exceptionally high standard for the people he chose to do business with. He had been courted by 3 of the largest asset management firms in the country. He had declined all 3. He had agreed to meet with Halstead Capital. The meeting had taken 4 months to arrange. The potential investment was $50 million, which was not the largest single deal in the company's history, but was not the smallest either. And more than the money, Takeda's name attached to Halstead Capital's client roster would open doors in the Asia-Pacific market that had been firmly closed to them. Serena had spent 6 weeks preparing. Her team had prepared a translation of the entire presentation into Japanese. They had hired a certified ASL interpreter, a woman named Patricia Wells, with 20 years of professional experience, fully vetted, who had worked with Takeda's office before. Patricia Wells had been in a car accident on the FDR Drive at 6:15 that morning. She was alive. She was in the hospital with a broken collarbone and a concussion. She was not, by any measure of human reality, going to be in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Halstead Capital Tower in 2 hours. "The backup," Serena said. Her voice was flat. "Unavailable. She's in Boston for a family situation, found out yesterday. I only just learned this." Daniel paused. "The agency is working on an emergency replacement. Earliest estimate is 60 to 90 minutes after the meeting start time." Serena looked out the car window at the morning traffic on Park Avenue and did the math quickly and didn't like any of the numbers. Takeda's flight departed JFK at 2 in the afternoon. He had a connection in Vancouver. He had been direct, through his own staff, about the fact that he did not rearrange his schedule. He had rescheduled for other people in the past, and each time he had done so, the meeting had not ended with a signature. "Postponing is not an option," she said. "I know." "Delay tactics? He'll see through them inside 10 minutes. His executive assistant told me he specifically asks, before any meeting, whether the interpretation arrangements are confirmed. If we tell him we're waiting on a replacement, he'll take it as disorganization." "It is disorganization." "Yes," Daniel said. "It is." There was a silence. "How many of our people have any ASL?" Serena asked. Daniel's pause was answer enough. "I'm checking. But Ms. Halstead, even if someone has conversational ASL, this is a $50 million negotiation. The terminology alone. I know what it is, Daniel." She picked up her tablet again without looking at it. "Keep checking. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived to controlled chaos dressed up as professionalism. The 42nd floor had the particular quality of a group of very intelligent, very well-compensated people working extremely hard not to look like they were panicking. Her deputy director, Neil Fraser, met her at the elevator with his jacket already slightly wrong. Not undone, but the kind of wrong that happened when you put it on while moving. Her head of investor relations, Christine Park, was on her phone near the glass wall of the conference room, speaking quietly and with increasing urgency to someone who was clearly not providing the answers she needed. The conference room was visible through that glass wall. It was set perfectly. The long table with 12 chairs. The presentation materials in Japanese and English. The catering arranged along the credenza, untouched. An audio-visual technician making last-minute checks on the display system, which didn't need checking but gave him something to do. Takeda was not yet in the building. "Tell me where we are," Serena said. Neil ran through it quickly. The agency had one certified interpreter available who could potentially arrive by 11:30. The meeting was at 10. Patricia's firm was making calls, but the interpreter pool for Japanese fluent ASL professionals who could handle financial negotiations at short notice on a Wednesday morning was not, it turned out, deep. They had explored the possibility of video relay interpretation, but Takeda's office had specifically noted in the initial meeting arrangements that he preferred live in-room interpretation when discussing matters of this complexity. "What about ASL-capable staff?" Serena asked. "I have 3 people who took beginner ASL courses. 2 of them took it years ago and remember almost nothing. One of them has intermediate-level skills, but she's in accounts and has no understanding of the deal structure." Neil looked at her directly. "It's not viable, Ms. Halstead." Serena nodded. She stood for a moment at the glass wall, looking into the prepared room. She was the strongest ASL speaker in the company's upper management. She'd been told this once by Christine as a kind of compliment, "You know more than any of us," and she'd accepted it at the time as something positive. Standing here now, she measured herself against what the next 2 hours actually required and found the gap to be significant. Her conversation with Mia across a breakfast table was not the same as interpreting complex investment terms and nuanced negotiation positions in real time. Dara had told her twice in the past week that her production speed was still her biggest weakness. Under pressure, her hand slowed. Under pressure, her vocabulary narrowed. She could not interpret this meeting. She was running the calculation for the 4th time, looking for a number that didn't exist, when she caught movement in her peripheral vision. Through the glass wall at the far end of the corridor, past the reception desk and the elevator bank, a maintenance cart was moving along the wall near the stairwell access. Serena turned her head. Grant was crouching beside the baseboard along the far wall, a panel open, the same voltage tester she'd seen him use before. He had his back to the corridor. He hadn't seen her. She stood very still. She thought about that day in the corridor when he'd told her about Tyler's specialist appointment. She thought about his hands moving with Mia at the Christmas party. She thought about Tyler, at the kitchen table, telling her that Grant sometimes signed so fast that even Tyler had to ask him to slow down. She thought about what Daniel had said. Even if someone has conversational ASL, this is a $50 million negotiation. She thought about a lot of things very quickly. Then she pushed through the door into the corridor. He heard the door open and looked up. He saw Serena's expression, and his posture changed immediately. Not alarm exactly, but the particular shift of a person whose read on a situation had sharpened before they had full information. He straightened slowly, voltage tester in hand. "How's your ASL?" she said. She hadn't planned to open with that. It came out direct and slightly raw, which was probably accurate. He looked at her for a beat. "Functional, you know that." "I need better than functional. I need someone who can interpret a 2-hour financial negotiation in real time." She held his gaze. "My certified interpreter was in a car accident this morning. The meeting is in 40 minutes. Grant was quiet for a moment. His expression didn't shift in any obvious direction. Not toward helpfulness, not toward refusal. He was doing what she had come to recognize as his particular way of thinking, still inward, not showing his process until he'd finished running it. "What's the subject matter?" he said. "Asset management strategy, fee structures, performance benchmarks, and risk exposure. The deal involves a $50 million commitment over a 5-year investment horizon." She paused. "The investor is Hiroshi Takeda. He's deaf. He's been in the industry for 30 years. He is not someone who responds well to uncertainty, and he'll know within about 5 minutes whether the interpretation is professional grade. Do you have the presentation materials?" "Yes." "How long do I have before he arrives?" She looked at her watch. 35 minutes. Grant stood there in his gray coveralls in the corridor outside her 42-floor conference room and said nothing for a moment. She watched him running numbers she couldn't see. I don't know your financial terminology," he said. "I know ASL. I don't know what performance benchmark signs to. I don't know your firm's specific language. You'd need a crash review of the materials. 35 minutes isn't a crash review. It's a list of the most critical terms. Can you do it?" He looked at her directly. "I've interpreted in high-pressure situations before, different kind, but the principle is the same." A pause. "If I don't know a term in real time, I'll stop and clarify it rather than guess. That's not a weakness. It's the only honest approach." Takeda will respect honesty more than fluency, Serena said. I've read everything I can find about how he works. He terminated a relationship with a Tokyo-based firm last year because he believed they were softening information to make it more palatable. He values precision. Then I need the materials, Grant said. Right now, Shab. Daniel chose face. When Serena brought Grant into the conference room 34 minutes before the meeting, went through 4 distinct expressions in approximately 2 seconds. The first was confusion. The second was recognition. He'd seen Grant in the building before. The third was something that wanted to be professional objection. The fourth was the expression of a man who understood that the available options were what they were, and that Serena Halstead did not bring people into a room without having made a decision. He needs the full presentation deck and a glossary of our key terms, Serena said. Give him everything. Christine Park was quicker to adapt. She was at Grant's side with the materials in under a minute, walking him through the structure of the presentation rapidly and without condescension. Grant moved through the deck with a focused speed that Serena recognized from the way he worked physically, purposeful, economical, not wasting motion or attention. He stopped Christine at several points, not frequently, but at precise moments. This section, variable fee structure tied to benchmark performance. What's the benchmark? Is it a standard index or something proprietary? It's a blend, Christine said. We use the MSCI World as the base with a proprietary overlay. When Takeda's team asks about it, what's your plain language explanation? Christine paused. We adjust the standard global market index with our own risk modeling to align with longer horizon investment goals. That's the explanation I'll use if the term comes up. He moved on. This one, capital preservation mandate. How do you typically explain this to a sophisticated investor? We're saying the portfolio is structured to prevent significant loss of principal, even in volatile market conditions. Good. He kept moving. Neil Fraser was watching from the corner of the room with the expression of a man revising an opinion he'd formed too quickly. He didn't say anything. Grant spent 22 minutes with the materials. He did not pretend to absorb everything. He was building a working map, the key terms, the deal structure, the points at which negotiation was most likely to happen, the places where imprecision could damage things irreparably. He moved through it with the systematic focus of someone who had, in his previous life, been required to absorb complex operational information in compressed time frames and act on it immediately. At 9:58, he looked up. I need to know one more thing, he said. He looked at Serena. Your position on the fee structure, is it fixed or is there flexibility? There's flexibility in the performance component. The base management fee is firm. If he pushes on the performance component, what's the floor? Serena told him. Grant nodded. Set the deck down on the table. Okay, he said. Neil said quietly, to no one in particular. We're going in with a maintenance worker. Serena looked at him. We're going in with the best available person for the job. She said it without heat, just as a statement of fact. Are we ready? The elevator chimed at the end of the corridor. Hiroshi Takeda was a compact man with white hair, cut close, and a suit that had cost more than Grant's monthly salary. He moved with the economical precision of someone who had spent 6 decades being underestimated in hearing rooms and had long since stopped being troubled by it. He was accompanied by 2 members of his executive team, both hearing, and a personal aide who managed his schedule and correspondence. The aide's name was Kenji. He looked at the assembled group in the conference room with a practiced, neutral expression that nonetheless conveyed an evaluation in progress. Serena introduced herself and her team. She did it smoothly, professionally, without telegraphing the morning's chaos. Then she said, Mr. Takeda, I'd like to introduce Grant Mercer, who will be interpreting today. She had thought about how to handle this. She had thought about it specifically during the 7 minutes between Grant saying, okay, and the elevator chiming. She had decided that the only approach with a man like Takeda was the direct one. Grant stepped forward. He made eye contact with Takeda, not aggressively, not deferentially. The same level attention he gave to everything. Then his hands moved. Good morning, Mr. Takeda. My name is Grant Mercer. I'll be interpreting for Halstead Capital today. I want to be straightforward with you. I'm not a certified professional interpreter. I'm fluent in ASL and I have a working knowledge of this presentation and these materials. If at any point I encounter a term I'm uncertain about, I'll stop and clarify rather than guess. I believe that's the more honest approach, and I'd rather slow down than give you an inaccurate translation. Kenji watched Takeda's face. Takeda's expression was difficult to read. I was looking at Grant with the careful assessment of someone who had spent a long career identifying exactly who people were beneath the surface of their presentations. He signed something. Kenji said, "Mr. Takeda would like to know your background." Grant looked at Takeda, not at Kenji. "Navy SEAL, 11 years of service. I've been out for 6 years. My son is deaf. I've been signing for 9 years. I currently work building maintenance in this tower." A pause. "I understand if you'd prefer to reschedule for a professional interpreter. That's a reasonable choice. I just wanted to give you accurate information so you could make it." The room was very quiet. Serena was standing at the head of the table and she was not showing anything on her face, but underneath it she was holding something very carefully, the way you held a fragile object over a hard floor. Takeda's eyes stayed on Grant for another moment. Then he signed. Kenji translated. He says, "A man who tells you what he doesn't know is more useful than a man who pretends he knows everything. Please sit down." No. The meeting ran for 51 minutes. Later, Serena would remember it as one of the most compressed, intense professional experiences of her career, and she had a career with a considerable supply of both. Grant sat at the corner of the table between Serena and Takeda, slightly turned toward Takeda to keep his signing visible, his body language calm, in the way that had nothing to do with relaxation and everything to do with training. He interpreted in both directions. Serena's English into ASL for Takeda, Takeda's signed responses into English for the room. He was not fast, in the way a professional interpreter was fast, but he was accurate, and he was honest. Twice during the meeting he stopped mid-interpretation. The first time came during the presentation's third segment, when Neil was walking through the performance benchmark structure and used a technical construction that Grant hadn't encountered in his 30-minute prep session. He raised one hand. "Hold on," he said. He looked at Neil. "Can you define alpha-adjusted return in plain terms? I don't want to translate a term I'm not certain I'm reading correctly." Neil blinked. "It's a measure of return that accounts for the portfolio's risk relative to the market. It tells the investor how much return came from the management strategy versus market conditions alone." "Thank you." Grant turned back to Takeda and signed the full explanation, clearly, without the technical shorthand. Takeda watched. Then he signed something brief. Kenji. He says that's the clearest explanation of alpha he's received in 12 years of meetings. Neil looked at the table. The second stop came near the end when the negotiation reached the performance fee component, the flexible portion Serena had briefed Grant on. Takeda's position, interpreted cleanly and precisely, was that he wanted the performance fee tied to a longer measurement period than Halstead Capital's standard structure allowed. He gave a specific number of months. He gave a specific rationale. He was clear and direct and, in Grant's interpretation, lost nothing. Serena's team had a response. There was a back and forth that lasted 11 minutes, the numbers moving, the positions adjusting. Grant held it all, consistently. When Takeda's signing became faster, a sign, Serena thought, that he was engaged rather than impatient, Grant kept pace without losing accuracy, and once, when he felt a phrase hadn't landed quite right, he interrupted himself and signed a clarification unprompted. Takeda noticed that. When they reached a number both sides could hold, Takeda looked at the term sheet in front of him. He looked at Serena. He signed. Kenji. He says he's reviewed this structure and finds it acceptable. Takeda picked up the pen. The room held its breath. He signed the document. Us. The congratulations in the immediate aftermath had the quality of something let out of a very small space, relief expressing itself as professionalism, which was the only register most of the people in the room knew. Christine shook hands with Kenji. Neil straightened his jacket and managed to look like he'd expected this outcome all along. Daniel, who had spent the meeting standing against the wall near the door, exhaled so visibly that 2 people turned to look at him. Serena walked Takeda and his team to the elevator. Before they reached it, Takeda slowed and turned. He looked at Grant, who had stepped back from the group with his characteristic absence of performance, moving to the side of things the way he always moved to the side of things. Takeda signed directly to him. Kenji did not translate immediately. He waited, as though the moment required the pause. Then, he says, "A company measures its strength by the people it brings into a room when things go wrong, not the people it brings when things are easy." Grant received this without expression for a moment. Then he inclined his head slightly. Not a bow, not quite, just a recognition. Takeda held his gaze for another second. Then he signed something else, something brief, something he did not wait for Kenji to translate. He turned and walked to the elevator. Kenji looked at Grant. He also said, "I hope they know what they have." The elevator doors opened. Takeda stepped in without looking back. His team followed. The doors closed. The hallway was quiet. Serena stood 6 feet from Grant and felt the 51 minutes of concentrated effort leaving her body in a single slow exhale. She was aware of Neil and Christine behind her and Daniel near the conference room door, and the general low-frequency recalibration of a team that had come very close to disaster and had not arrived there. She looked at Grant. He was looking at the closed elevator doors with an expression she couldn't fully parse. Not pride, not satisfaction, something more private. The expression of a man who had been required to do something and had done it and was now, very quietly, acknowledging to himself that it had worked. "What did he sign?" she asked. At the end, before Kenji translated. Grant looked at her. A pause, small but real. He said, "I hope they know what they have." His voice was level. Kenji translated that one. "Before that," she said. The one Kenji didn't translate immediately. Grant was quiet for a moment. He said... He stopped, seemed to reconsider the phrasing. Then, he said a company can replace a contract. It should never overlook a man like you. Serena held that. She looked at this man, in his gray coveralls, with his calloused hands and his straight posture and his complete characteristic absence of performance. And she felt something clarify inside her that had been in the process of clarifying for weeks. Something that had started in a ballroom on a December night when she'd watched a maintenance worker cross a crowded room to crouch in front of her daughter, and had been building quietly ever since in park benches and kitchen tables in Brooklyn evenings and late-night ASL practice sessions. She had spent a long time being surrounded by people who performed their competence at her, who wore their capability as a statement, who made sure she registered what they brought to a room. It was the atmosphere of her professional world, and she had gotten so accustomed to it that she'd forgotten it wasn't the only way a person could be. Grant had just interpreted a $50 million negotiation in maintenance coveralls, made 2 honest stops to clarify terminology he hadn't been certain of, and was now standing in the hallway with the self-possession of a man who considered what he'd done finished rather than remarkable. He didn't wait for her to process all of this. "I should get back to the panel I had open," he said. She almost laughed. The actual laugh that came out of her sometimes now, the one that wasn't polished. It surfaced, and then she pressed her lips together and managed something more composed. "Grant." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "That's insufficient, but it's what I have right now." "It's enough," he said. He picked up his cart from where he'd left it against the corridor wall and moved it back toward the stairwell access. He didn't look back. He didn't wait to see whether anyone was watching him go. Neil Fraser said, behind her, quietly and with the particular honesty of someone who had finished revising an opinion, "Who is he?" Serena watched Grant disappear around the corner. "I'm still figuring that out," she said. She went back into the conference room. The signed term sheet was on the table, $50 million of future committed to paper, and she stood in front of it and thought about a man who had learned a language in the dark hours after his son went to sleep, who had absorbed a 30-minute crash course in financial terminology and gone into a high-stakes room and told an investor, without embarrassment, exactly what he did and didn't know. She thought about what Takeda had said. A company can replace a contract. She thought, so can the right person, if you let them walk back to a maintenance cart without saying anything about it. She thought about what she was going to do next. She didn't have a fully formed answer, but she had a direction, and in Serena Halstead's experience, a direction was where everything started. She picked up the signed term sheet, set it neatly in the folder Daniel was already holding, and said, "Call the board. I need 30 minutes with them before end of day." Daniel opened his mouth. "Not about the deal," she said. "About something else." She walked out of the conference room and toward her office, and she had the particular feeling she sometimes got at the beginning of things. Not comfort, not certainty, but the sharp, slightly uncomfortable sense of a decision forming that she already knew she was going to make. The board meeting that afternoon lasted 47 minutes. Serena had called it for 4 o'clock, which gave her 3 hours to organize her thinking, eat something she didn't taste, and sit in her office for 20 minutes doing nothing, which was not something she did often, and was, she had learned, the most productive thing available to her when she needed to know her own mind. There were 8 board members. 5 were in the room, 3 joined by video. They were a collective of people who had known Serena for years, who had watched her build the second half of Halstead Capital from a position of measured skepticism that had gradually converted to something approaching confidence in her judgment. They were not people who alarmed easily. She told them about the morning. All of it. Patricia Wells, the accident, the replacement gap, Grant's involvement in the Takeda meeting. She told it without editorializing. She let the facts carry the weight. Then she told them what she wanted to do. She wanted to establish a permanent accessibility division within Halstead Capital. Not a compliance checkbox, not a bullet point in the annual report. An actual operational division with a real budget and a real mandate, dedicated to building communication infrastructure for deaf and hard-of-hearing employees and clients. Certified interpretation services on staff or on retainer. ASL fluent client liaisons. Internal training programs. A physical space designed for the needs of people whose needs the company had been handling, at best, as an afterthought. She wanted Grant Mercer to help build it. The room was quiet when she finished. Robert Ennis, the oldest member of the board, 73 years old, with a hearing aid he'd worn for a decade and had never once mentioned in a business context, said, "You want to put a maintenance worker in a leadership position. I want to put a Navy SEAL with 9 years of ASL fluency and a demonstrated ability to handle high-stakes communication under pressure into a role that fits what he actually is," Serena said. The maintenance work was what was available to him. It's not what he's limited to. He has no finance background. He doesn't need one for this role. The division's function is communication and access infrastructure, not portfolio management. He'll be working with our existing finance teams, not replacing them. She looked at Ennis directly. He saved the Takeda deal this morning because he walked into a $50 million negotiation and told the investor, clearly and without embarrassment, exactly what he knew and what he didn't. That's not a skill I can train into most of the people in this building. It's an unusual hire, said Margaret Yoon from the video screen on the left wall. She was the youngest board member at 51, and her expression was the one she wore when she was interested but not yet persuaded. "Yes," Serena said, "you're aware of how it looks." "I'm aware of how it looks, and I'm aware of how it is. Those are different things." She set her hands flat on the table. "We have a signed agreement with Takeda Pacific Holdings because Grant Mercer walked into that room. We have a daughter of a board member." She paused and let that sit, because Ennis's daughter was deaf, and everyone at the table knew it, and nobody had ever said so directly in a board meeting. "Who deserves to walk into a client meeting at this company and find people prepared to communicate with her. We have employees who've been navigating this building for years without adequate support, and haven't said so because there's no structure that invites them to." Ennis was looking at the table. "This is not a charitable gesture," Serena said. "This is a business decision that is also the right thing to do. I'm not going to pretend those two things are in conflict, because they're not." The vote was 6-2 in favor. Ennis was one of the 6. She told Grant the following morning. She had thought about the right way to do this and arrived at the same conclusion she'd arrived at before. Direct was the only honest option. She went down to the maintenance bay at the start of his shift at 7:30 and knocked on the door frame the same way she'd done the first time, and he looked up from a work order with the same careful, prepared expression. "I'd like to talk to you," she said. He set the work order down. "Again?" "Again." They stood in the hallway again because the maintenance bay was too small and a conference room felt wrong. It had become, without either of them formally deciding this, their place, the neutral space between his world and hers. She told him about the board meeting. She explained the scope of the division she intended to build. She told him clearly that the role she was offering was not a courtesy position, not a title attached to an empty desk. It was real work with a real budget and a mandate that the company was, effective immediately, committed to. When she finished, Grant was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not a businessman," he said. I know that. I don't know how a company division is structured or managed. You'll learn. We'll get you the support you need for the operational side. She held his gaze. What you know. The language, the community, the experience of raising a deaf child and navigating every institution that wasn't built for him. That's not learnable from a business textbook. That's what the division actually needs. He looked at the wall for a moment. She had learned that this was how he thought, not out loud, not with visible process, but somewhere internal and quiet. What happened in that meeting yesterday, he said, was specific. I had 30 minutes of preparation and a finite amount of material. A permanent role is different. Yes, she said. There'll be situations I'm not prepared for. There are situations I'm not prepared for every week, she said. That's not a disqualification. That's the job. He looked at her. She held it. The salary, he said finally. She told him. He went very still. That's what the role is worth, she said. Not a gesture, not a rounded-up charity number. That's the market value for building and leading a division with this scope and this mandate, adjusted for the specific expertise you bring. She paused. I had Daniel run the comps. He didn't say anything for a moment. Tyler's school, he said. Not a question, not exactly a statement. Just the name of the thing that immediately occupied the space the number had opened. There's also a comprehensive benefits package, Serena said. Education support is included. He stood in the hallway in his gray coveralls and she watched something move through him that he was working hard to keep contained. Not overwhelm, not gratitude, but something older and more complicated. The expression of a man who had spent 6 years arranging his life around a set of constraints so thoroughly that the constraints had started to feel like the shape of things, and who was now being asked to look at a different shape. I need a few days, he said. Take what you need. This isn't a no. I know, she said. She left him in the hallway and went upstairs to her office and spent the first 30 minutes of her workday doing something she almost never did. Nothing. She sat at her desk and looked at the city through the glass and felt the particular vertigo of a situation that had moved beyond her control in the way that only the situations she most cared about ever did. He said yes 4 days later, on a Sunday. He said it at the kitchen table in the Park Slope apartment while Tyler and Mia were in the other room, arguing in ASL about whether a movie they'd both already seen counted as a new choice for tonight, and Biscuit was pressed against Grant's leg with the dog's characteristic conviction that physical proximity solved most problems. Serena was washing a coffee cup she'd already washed because her hands needed something to do. I talked to Tyler, Grant said. She turned. I told him the situation. Not all the financial details, but the shape of it. New job, harder work, different hours probably. He paused. He asked if I'd still be able to make his basketball games. What did you tell him? I told him I'd miss some and make most. He looked at Biscuit. He thought about it for about 10 seconds, and then he said, Dad, you've been making things work my whole life. You can make this work too. He was eating a sandwich when he said it. Very matter of fact. Serena turned back to the sink. He's a good kid, she said. Her voice came out slightly uneven at the edges, which she hadn't planned. He's better than I deserve most days, Grant said. But I'm working on the gap. She set the cup down, turned around. Yes, Grant said. To the job. Yes. She nodded. She didn't make it into more than it was, like not with a speech, not with visible relief, just a nod that acknowledged the weight of it and let him keep his dignity around the decision. Okay, she said, I'm going to need a mentor for the operational side. Someone patient. I'll assign Daniel. He has the patience of a very organized saint, and he's been looking for a project that actually challenges him. I'm going to make mistakes. I know. Significant ones probably at the start. Significant mistakes at the start are how things get built correctly by the end, she said. I've made enough of them to be confident about that. He looked at her with the expression she'd started associating with the moments he was deciding to trust something. It wasn't a dramatic look. It was quiet and careful and very direct. All right, he said. From the other room, Mia's voice, her signing visible through the open doorway, went emphatic, and Tyler's response went equally emphatic, and then both of them laughed, and the apartment absorbed it the way it absorbed everything, fully, without echo, like a space that had been built to hold exactly this. The announcement went out to Halstead Capital staff on a Thursday. Serena sent it herself, which was unusual. Most internal communications went through HR or Daniel's office. This one came from her directly, under her name, without the standard corporate phrasing that turned human decisions into policy language. She wrote that the company was establishing an accessibility and inclusion division, effective immediately. She wrote that this decision had been a long time coming and that she was aware of that. She wrote that the impetus had been a specific situation, an interpreter emergency, a $50 million meeting, a man who had stepped into the gap and handled it with more honesty and skill than the company had any right to expect, and that what that situation had revealed was a structural gap the company should have addressed years earlier. She wrote Grant Mercer's name. She wrote his background, the Navy, Tyler, the 9 years of ASL, the maintenance work that had brought him into the building and, eventually, into a conference room when it mattered. She did not write that he had first made himself known to her by crossing a ballroom to crouch in front of her daughter. That was not the company's story to hold. She wrote, "The right person for a job is not always where you expect to find them." The response from staff was not uniform. There were people who sent congratulatory notes to Grant before he'd even cleared out his maintenance bay. Several deaf and hard-of-hearing employees. The company had 6, a number that had never been formally tracked until Daniel compiled it that week. Reached out within hours, not with formal messages, but with the direct, unguarded relief of people who had been managing around a gap for a long time and had just been told the gap was going to be addressed. There were also people who said nothing to Grant directly and said quite a lot to one another in the margins of things. Serena was aware of this. She was aware of the specific resistance that came when a company's established hierarchy encountered someone who had arrived at a position through a route that didn't follow the recognized path. It wasn't always malicious. Some of it was simply the discomfort of pattern disruption, and she had enough experience managing human organizations to know that the disruption had to be sustained longer than the discomfort before the new pattern could hold. Neil Fraser came to her office on the Friday after the announcement. She had been expecting this. Neil was 54, had been at the company for 11 years, was technically excellent and personally careful, and had spent most of those 11 years navigating the gap between his own considerable capabilities and Serena's, which was a gap he handled with professionalism and occasional tightness around the eyes. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had very fixed ideas about how things should work. He sat across from her desk. "I want to talk about the Mercer situation," he said. "I assumed," she said, "the Takeda meeting was impressive. I'll grant that without qualification. What he did in that room was," he paused, choosing words, "genuinely impressive. I was wrong to dismiss the idea." "But," she said, "the division leadership is a significant step. He has no management experience, no institutional knowledge, no background in financial services." He set his hands on his knees. "I'm not saying he isn't capable. I'm saying the structure around him needs to be very carefully built, or he's going to be set up for public failure, which is bad for him and bad for the company." Serena looked at him for a moment. "You're right," she said. Neil blinked. "The structure matters. I agree. That's why Daniel is working with him full-time for the first 3 months, and why I've budgeted for 2 senior hires within the division who have the operational background Grant doesn't." She leaned forward slightly. "What I need from you, Neil, is not a protected institutional structure that keeps things the way they've been. What I need is for you to understand that this division's success is the company's success, and for you to treat it accordingly." Neil was quiet. "Can you do that?" she said. Not harshly. Just a real question. He looked at the window, then back at her. "I can do that," he said. "Good." She picked up her pen. "Because I'm also going to need you on the client-facing protocol redesign. You're the best operational mind in this building for that kind of systematizing, and I'd rather have you helping build this than standing at the edge of it." Something shifted in Neil's expression. The tightness around the eyes loosened incrementally. "Send me the scope," he said. "Daniel will have it to you Monday morning." Well, Grant's first week in the new role was, by any honest measure, difficult. He knew it would be. He had told Serena it would be, and he had been right. And being right about it didn't make it significantly easier. The practical problem was not the work itself. He had never been afraid of work, and the work was real and visible, and something he could move through with the same systematic focus he brought to everything. The accessibility audit alone was a 6-week project, identifying every point in the company's client-facing and internal operations where deaf and hard-of-hearing individuals encountered inadequate support, documenting it, building a remediation plan. He was good at that. He moved through it with the thoroughness of someone who had spent years noticing exactly the things other people missed. The social problem was different. He walked into the building in a suit on his first Monday, and the lobby security guard, a man he'd worked alongside for 11 months, who knew his coffee order and his maintenance rotation and had lent him a phone charger 3 times, looked at him with the particular blankness of a person whose categories had been disrupted. "Morning, Marcus," Grant said. Marcus recovered quickly. "Morning. You look—" He stopped. "Different," Grant said. "Yeah." A pause. "Good different." It was not the only version of that interaction he had that week. He passed people in corridors who had seen him in coveralls for almost a year and now saw him in a charcoal jacket and had to briefly recalibrate before they managed an expression. Some of them recalibrated smoothly. Some of them took longer than they should have. A few of them, the ones who sat in the upper floors and had never registered his existence in the previous version, treated him with the careful neutrality of people who weren't sure yet what he was in relation to them. He had been through harder things. He noticed it, filed it, moved on. The harder adjustment was the one he hadn't fully predicted. The experience of sitting in conference rooms where people deferred to him, where they waited for his input, where they addressed him as though his opinion was a weight in the room. He had spent 6 years in jobs where he was functionally invisible to the people who held the weight. He had learned, by necessity, to be comfortable in that invisibility, to do good work without recognition, to carry things without acknowledgement, because Tyler needed food and stability and a father who didn't spend energy on resentment. The transition from that posture to this one required more internal adjustment than he'd anticipated. Daniel noticed, because Daniel noticed most things. They were in a small conference room at the end of the second week, going through the budget structure for the division's first quarter, and Grant had been quiet for about 10 minutes longer than his usual quiet. "You good?" Daniel said. Grant looked at him. Daniel was 31, had an MBA from Wharton, and had somehow managed to spend 3 years as Serena's chief of staff without losing either his organizational precision or his capacity for direct conversation. "Getting there," Grant said. "The room thing?" Grant looked at him. "I've watched it for 2 weeks," Daniel said. "You're fine one-on-one. You're fine in operational mode. The minute someone defers to you in a group context, you spend about 5 seconds looking like you're deciding whether you actually belong in the chair." He said it without judgment, the way he delivered most information. Wow, I had the same thing when Serena first promoted me. Different version of the same thing." "What fixed it?" Daniel shrugged. "Mostly just time. Doing the work long enough that the chair started feeling like mine instead of someone else's that I was borrowing." He paused. "Also, she told me once that imposter syndrome and reasonable humility look almost identical from the outside, and the only difference is whether you let it stop you." Grant absorbed that. "She say that to a lot of people?" "Only the ones she thinks are worth the conversation," Daniel said. "She doesn't waste calibration on people she's not invested in." Grant looked at the budget documents on the table between them. He thought about what Takeda had signed in that corridor, about what Serena had said, standing in the hallway outside the maintenance bay, when she'd told him the role was real. "I'd rather have you building this than standing at the edge of it." He thought about Tyler eating a sandwich, saying, "Dad, you've been making things work my whole life. You can make this work too." "Okay," he said. He picked up his pen. "Walk me through the Q2 projection again. I want to understand the depreciation model." Daniel pushed the document across the table. They worked until 6:30. The 6 deaf and hard-of-hearing employees at Halstead Capital had, before the accessibility division existed, been managing their workplace experience with a patchwork of accommodations that each of them had individually negotiated, explained, re-explained, and in some cases simply given up on. Grant met with each of them in the first 3 weeks. Not as group meetings, those had their own value and he'd schedule them later, but individually, one at a time, in whatever space they preferred. His office, the small kitchen, the conference room on the 38th floor that got afternoon light and was usually empty. He came to these meetings with a legal pad and the working assumption that he knew less than they did about their own experience. This turned out to be the right assumption. A woman named Iris, 38, A senior analyst who had been with the company for 7 years told him that she had spent the first 3 years resending meeting materials because the company's standard practice was to post them in a shared drive 3 minutes before the meeting started, which gave hearing participants enough time to open a laptop and scroll while someone talked through them, and gave Iris, who needed to read the materials fully before she could follow a discussion, no time at all. She had asked twice for materials to be distributed in advance. The second time she asked, her manager had said the process would be looked at. It hadn't been changed. "Did you ask again after that?" Grant said. "No," Iris said. She said it without apology, just straightforwardly. "I found workarounds. I got better at reconstructing what I'd missed from the follow-up notes. I stopped fighting things I couldn't change." "That's a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation," Grant said. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had not expected to hear that from a company representative. "What would actually help?" he asked. "Not what's feasible, not what's easy for the company. What would actually make your job work better?" She told him. She had a list. She pulled it up on her phone. She'd been keeping it for years, she said, not because she thought anyone would ever ask, but because writing it down helped her not to feel invisible. He wrote down everything on the list. He had the same meeting with the other 5 employees and walked away with 5 different lists that had significant overlap and some points that were entirely specific to one person's situation. He consolidated everything, ran it past the division's newly hired accessibility coordinator, and brought the full documented package to Serena at the end of week 3. She read through it at her desk while he sat across from her. When she finished, she set it down and looked at him. 7 years, she said. Iris has been here 7 years and nobody asked her this question. She's been managing around it. That's not... She stopped, picked the right word. That's not acceptable. No, he said. It's not. What do you need to start fixing it? He told her. Budget, personnel. A standing agenda item in the department head's bi-weekly meeting. A formal materials in advance policy with a timeline that actually worked. Access to the IT team for the captioning infrastructure upgrade. The list was specific and bounded, and he had costed out most of it already. Serena approved the budget that afternoon. The materials policy, she said. I want that company-wide within 30 days. Not a pilot, not a test run, company-wide. Some of the department heads are going to push back. They can push back to me. She looked at him steadily. That's one of the things I'm for. He nodded and stood. Grant, she said. He looked back. The meeting with Iris. She paused. She told me this morning that nobody from the company had ever asked her what she actually needed in 7 years. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. Thank you for asking. He held that for a moment. She had a list ready, he said. That's the thing that stayed with me. She'd been keeping it for years, just in case. He let that sit between them. Then he went back to his office, which was still new enough to feel borrowed, and sat down at his desk and opened the consolidated report and started building the implementation timeline, item by item. What was happening outside the office was slower and less structured, and, for that reason, considerably more consequential. Sunday dinners had not been interrupted by any of it. Not by the job change, not by the board vote, not by the adjustment period, not by any of the things that would have given either of them a reasonable excuse to pause the rhythm they'd built over the preceding months. The rhythm held. It held because Tyler wanted it to hold, and Mia wanted it to hold, and 2 children who had found each other were not interested in accommodating adult complications that had nothing to do with them. Tyler had cleared a section of his bookshelf for Mia's sketchbooks. This had happened without announcement. Serena had simply noticed, one Sunday in late March, that the shelf space existed and that Mia's current sketchbook was sitting there as though it had always lived in that spot. Mia had started calling the apartment her second home sometime in February. She didn't announce this either. She said it once to Tyler, signing with the casual certainty of a child reporting a fact. This is my second home. Tyler had signed back, obviously. And that was the end of the conversation. Grant was aware that Serena was aware of all of this. They didn't talk about it directly. They talked around it the way 2 careful people talked around things that were real and large and slightly frightening in their realness, not denying it, but not naming it yet, because naming it would require both of them to stand in the same place at the same time and admit what the place was. There was a Sunday evening in April that got close. The children were asleep. Mia had fallen asleep on Tyler's floor, which happened sometimes when the evening stretched long and no one wanted to be the one to say it was time to go. Tyler was in his bed, already gone by 9, the way athletic children went down, suddenly and completely. Biscuit was on the foot of the bed, technically not allowed, technically always there. Grant and Serena were in the kitchen. It was past 10. They were drinking coffee that was a mistake at this hour, and both of them knew it, and neither of them moved to stop. The kitchen light was the only one on, and it was warm and low, and the apartment made the small sounds it made when the building settled around them. Serena was sitting on the counter. Grant was leaning against the opposite wall with his coffee cup. There was the length of the kitchen between them, which was not a large distance. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "The private security firm. The one you left after 8 months." She watched him. "Marcus pulled your background when I asked about you after the gala. There's a gap there. 8 months, and then you left." He was quiet for a moment. "You're asking me now." "I'm asking you now." He looked at his coffee cup, then at the window above the sink, which showed nothing but the dark and the reflection of the kitchen. "The firm did security work for corporate clients," he said. "High-value individuals, some of it overseas. The money was good, genuinely good, the best I'd been paid since leaving the Navy. And about 4 months in, I was offered a role that required extended deployment. 3 months in Southeast Asia, protecting an executive involved in some kind of extraction rights negotiation." He paused. "The money would have changed things for Tyler significantly. School options, the neighborhood we could live in." "But you left," she said. "Tyler was 6. His mother was gone. I was the one thing in his life that stayed put." He set the coffee cup on the counter beside him. "I couldn't take a 3-month deployment, and I knew if I took that one, there'd be another. That's how that work goes." He looked at her. "So I left, and I found the first thing that kept food on the table and let me be home every night." Serena held that. "You didn't hesitate," she said. "I hesitated for about 2 days," he said. "Then I did the math. The math came out one way." "The math always came out one way," he said. "Tyler first. Everything else arranges itself around that." Serena looked at him. She thought about a 30-year-old woman who had built a financial empire and sent her daughter to elite schools and hired the best doctors and the best tutors, and had still, somehow, managed to miss the part where her daughter needed her to be present in a language Mia could actually access. She thought about the distinction between providing for someone and being there for them. It was not a new thought. It had been sitting in her chest for months, becoming more specific. "I miss things," she said. Not an apology exactly, just a fact she needed to say out loud. "With Mia, I was there. I was physically present, but I was—" She stopped. "Solving problems," Grant said. "The ones you could solve with resources." "Yes. That's not a character flaw. That's a person doing what they know." He wasn't excusing her. He was being accurate. "The thing is, knowing and doing are separate steps." "I'm learning that." "Yeah," he said. "I can tell." She looked at him. In the warm, low light of the kitchen, with the city quiet outside and the children asleep at the end of the hall, and Biscuit conducting his after-midnight furniture audit, she felt with complete clarity the thing she'd been not naming for months. It sat between them in the narrow kitchen, patient and large, waiting for one of them to say it, or neither of them to say it, and for it to exist anyway. Grant was looking back at her, not with his careful, assessing look, with something older and more direct that he hadn't pointed at her quite this plainly before. Neither of them said anything. The apartment settled around them with a sound like exhaling. Then Mia appeared in the kitchen doorway, squinting against the light, her hair sideways from the floor. She looked at them both, reading the room the way she always did, completely, without sound, and something in her expression suggested she understood more than 8-year-olds were supposed to understand. She signed, sleepily. "Are you two still awake?" "Yes," Serena signed back. "That's dumb. It's late." "You're right," Grant signed. "Go back to the floor." Mia considered this, decided it was acceptable, and disappeared back down the hallway. Grant looked at Serena. Serena looked at Grant. And then both of them were laughing, quietly, the restrained laughter of two people trying not to wake children. And the thing that had been large and patient and waiting in the kitchen was still there, but it was surrounded now by something lighter, and the kitchen felt like somewhere a person could breathe. Serena picked up her coffee cup. "I should take her home," she said. "Probably," he said. She slid off the counter. He didn't move from the wall. The space between them was the length of the kitchen, and she crossed half of it while getting her jacket from the chair, which meant she was standing closer to him than the counter had put her, and they were both aware of this and neither of them addressed it. "Grant," she said. He looked at her. She wanted to say something and found, for possibly the first time in her professional memory, that the words weren't organized in the way she needed them. So she just looked at him for a moment, this man in a kitchen in Brooklyn who had remade his entire life around a small boy who needed him, who had walked into a boardroom in coveralls and been more honest than anyone in the room, who had noticed her daughter counting chandelier lights when 60 people hadn't. "Good night," she said. "Night," he said. She went to collect Mia. He listened to the sounds of her gathering a sleeping child and a jacket and a sketchbook, and then the soft close of the front door and the footsteps on the stairs going down. He stood in the kitchen for a while after that, in the quiet, with his coffee gone cold in the cup. He was not a man given to self-examination as a leisure activity, but standing in the small, warm kitchen with the light on and the city outside and the particular feeling of a room that had held something good that evening, he understood, with the same clarity he brought to everything when he let himself be still long enough, that something was already decided, even if neither of them had said so. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to check on Tyler, who was exactly where he always was, exactly as deeply asleep as he always was at this hour, Biscuit occupying 2/3 of the available bed space with the confidence of an animal who had never doubted its right to be there. Grant stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought, everything I did led here. Not to the job or the building or any of the external things that had changed in the last few months. Here, this doorway, this kid, the sketchbook on the shelf that belonged to someone else's daughter who had decided this was her second home. He thought that was enough to hold on to. He pulled Tyler's door almost closed and went to bed and slept without difficulty, which was something he'd had to learn over years and had finally, without much fanfare, managed. Summer arrived the way it always did in New York. Not gradually, not with any particular courtesy, but suddenly and completely, the city shifting from the gray hesitation of late spring into something loud and saturated and relentless. The days stretched long. The park and Carroll Gardens filled with people who had been waiting months for exactly this. And on Saturday afternoons, Grant and Serena still took the children there, though the dynamic had shifted in the way that things shifted when you weren't paying close attention to the shifting itself. Tyler had joined a summer basketball clinic in Prospect Park. He was still not good at basketball, a fact he accepted with considerably more equanimity than Grant, who had hoped the clinic would produce measurable improvement and had been informed by the coach, gently, that Tyler's enthusiasm was exceptional and his spatial awareness was developing. Tyler's response to this assessment had been to practice in the apartment hallway with a smaller ball until Grant asked him to stop because Biscuit kept stealing it. Mia had started teaching herself guitar from a YouTube channel that taught music theory through visual notation and tactile vibration. She played it through the soundboard against her collarbone and said she could feel the difference between chords. Serena had not known this was possible. She had looked it up after Mia explained it, and then she had sat at her kitchen table for a while, feeling the particular humility of a parent learning, again, that her child was capable of things she hadn't imagined to accommodate. The accessibility division at Halstead Capital had by June moved from construction to operation. The materials in advance policy was company-wide and largely functional, though 3 department heads had tested the edges of it and been reminded once each by Serena that the policy was not a suggestion. The captioning infrastructure was live on all conference room video systems. 2 certified ASL interpreters were on retainer, available for client meetings with 48 hours notice and for emergency situations with considerably less. Iris had been in 2 client presentations since the new protocol and had told Grant, with the directness he'd come to appreciate about her, that it was the first time in 7 years she'd been able to follow a meeting in real time without reconstruction. Grant had written that down too. Not for a report, just because it mattered and he didn't want to forget the specific weight of it. He was better in the chair by June. Not entirely comfortable, he suspected that would take longer, and he'd stopped trying to rush it, but functional in a way that felt earned rather than performed. Daniel had told him at the end of May that he was the most prepared person in any room he entered, which Grant had received with skepticism until Daniel clarified, "I don't mean you know the most. I mean you've thought harder about what you don't know than anyone else there. That's a different kind of preparation, and it's rarer." He thought about that sometimes, when the chair still felt borrowed. The thing that had been sitting in the kitchen in April did not go away. It didn't resolve itself either, which would have been convenient. It simply stayed present, in the particular quality of the silences between them, in the way they moved around each other in that small apartment kitchen, in the moments when one of them said something and the other looked at them for a half-second longer than the sentence required. Neither of them was in a hurry, exactly, and neither of them could claim they didn't know what was happening. They were two careful people who had both, in different ways, been burned by moving faster than the ground beneath them could hold, and they were both, in different ways, protecting something more important than their own feelings. Two children who had built a world that included all four of them, and who did not deserve to have that world disturbed by adults who hadn't thought it through. So they thought it through, separately, quietly, and for longer than was strictly necessary. The conversation happened on a Tuesday evening in late June that had not been planned as a significant evening by either of them. Mia was at a sleepover with her two best friends from the Chelsea school. Tyler was at his cousin's in New Jersey for the week. Grant's sister, who had taken Tyler during that hard stretch before Grant had gotten out of the Navy and had maintained a real relationship with him ever since. The apartment was empty except for Grant and Biscuit, which happened so rarely that the quiet had an unusual texture to it. Serena had texted in the afternoon to say she was walking home from the office and would pass through the neighborhood and was there any coffee. It was a casual text. They both understood it was not entirely casual. She arrived at 7:30 with a paper bag from the bakery 2 blocks away because she had walked past it, and the alternative was arriving empty-handed, which felt wrong in a way she didn't examine too closely. Grant opened the door in jeans and a faded Navy-issue t-shirt that had seen better decades, and Biscuit launched himself at her knees with his customary conviction that her arrival was the best possible news. They sat in the living room rather than the kitchen, which was different, and both of them registered that it was different without saying so. They talked for a while about the week, the division, a new client inquiry that had come in from a firm in Chicago looking for Halstead's accessibility services as a model for their own operations, which Serena found gratifying and Grant found slightly surreal. Tyler's basketball, Mia's guitar, the comfortable material of two people who had accumulated enough shared life to fill conversation easily. And then the conversation slowed the way it slowed when the surface material ran out. Serena was sitting with her coffee cup balanced on her knee, and Grant was at the other end of the couch, and Biscuit had distributed himself between them with his head on Grant's leg and his hindquarters technically on Serena's side, which was either an accident or a statement. "I've been thinking," Serena said. "Okay," Grant said, "about the kitchen. In April." A pause. "I figured." I didn't say anything then because I wasn't ready to say it correctly. She looked at him directly, which was something she'd learned from him, the value of not looking away from things. "I'm ready now." He didn't say anything. He was doing his thinking thing, the internal quiet, but his eyes were on her and they were steady, and there was nothing in them that looked like it wanted to be somewhere else. "I've been on my own with Mia for 4 years," she said. "Not alone. I have staff, I have systems, I have resources that most people can't imagine, but alone in the way that matters. Nobody to call at 11 at night when she's had a bad week. Nobody who already understands the situation before I start explaining it." She stopped, reorganized. I had become very accustomed to that being the shape of things. I'd stopped expecting it to be different. "And then," Grant said, "and then a man in maintenance coveralls crouched in front of my daughter at a Christmas party, and she smiled the way she smiles when she's completely safe." She held his gaze. "I didn't know what I was watching at the time. I think I've been figuring it out ever since." Grant was quiet for a moment. "I made a decision a long time ago," he said, "that Tyler came first. Not as a sacrifice, as a choice. I didn't want to be the kind of father who was technically present and actually absent because he was managing something else." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "And somewhere in that, I stopped expecting anything for myself that wasn't about him. Not consciously, just gradually. The way you stop expecting things you've stopped planning for. And then, Serena said. She used his phrasing back at him, and his mouth moved slightly. And then a woman who owns $4 billion in assets sat on a park bench in Carroll Gardens and laughed at something Tyler said about a dog, and it was the most real laugh I'd heard in a room I was in for longer than I could remember. He set the coffee cup down. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't know entirely, but I know what it was. Serena looked at him. She had built a company from the inside out. She had negotiated across tables with people who were trying to take things from her and had won more than she'd lost. She had raised a daughter with a significant communication difference largely on her own and had done it imperfectly and was still doing it and getting incrementally better. She was not, by any measure she could apply to herself, a woman who frightened easily. She was slightly frightened now. Not of him. Of the size of what she was about to say and mean, and what it would require of both of them if she said it. I don't want to do this wrong, she said. There are 2 children involved, and they have built something together that is worth more than whatever this is between us. And if this goes badly, I know, he said. I need you to actually hear that, not as a caveat, as the thing that determines everything else. Serena. He said her name the way he said most things, without performance, without decoration. I have spent 6 years making every decision through the question of what it means for Tyler. I understand the calculation. I'm not asking you to risk the children's world. He looked at her steadily. I'm asking you if you want to try to build something that includes all of it, not instead of it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, yes, just that. He nodded. Once. The same nod he'd given her that first day in the corridor when she'd said thank you and he'd said it was enough. The nod of a man who received important information and let it be important without needing to make noise about it. Biscuit, between them, shifted and sighed deeply. Both of them looked at the dog. He's had opinions about this for months, Grant said. I noticed, Serena said. And the kitchen, the whole apartment, held them in the quiet of a Tuesday evening in June, and it was not a perfect moment. It was not cinematic. It was 2 tired and careful people sitting on a couch with a dog between them, deciding to stop being careful about one specific thing, which was perhaps the bravest version of a beginning available to adults who had already lived enough to know what beginnings cost. They took it slowly, not because it was unclear, but because slow was the right pace for something they intended to keep, and they were both people who had learned, through different routes and different losses, that the things worth keeping required the patience to build them correctly the first time. Mia figured it out before anyone told her, which surprised no one who knew Mia. It was a Sunday in August, 6 weeks after the Tuesday evening, and the 4 of them were in Grant's kitchen making dinner in the particular organized chaos that had become their shared version of cooking. Tyler responsible for anything that involved stirring or timing, Mia positioned at the kitchen table doing quality control on the garlic bread, Grant managing the actual heat, Serena attempting to follow instructions while Grant corrected her periodically with the patience he applied to everything. You're watching the wrong pan, he said. I was told to watch the sauce. The sauce doesn't need watching. The garlic bread is about to... I have the garlic bread, Mia signed from the table, not looking up. She has the garlic bread, Tyler confirmed. Serena looked at Grant. Grant looked at Serena. There was something in the look, something abbreviated and warm and specific to them, and Mia caught it from across the kitchen with the accuracy of a child who had spent her entire life reading rooms without sound. She set down the bread and signed, Are you 2 together now? The kitchen went briefly quiet. Serena looked at Grant. Mia, she started. I'm not asking in a bad way, Mia signed, with the directness she'd inherited from her mother and had never been taught to soften. I'm asking because I already think you are, and I want to know if I'm right. Tyler had turned from the stove. He was looking at his father with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not entirely succeeding. Grant looked at his son. Yeah, he said. He signed it simultaneously, for both of them. We are. Tyler's neutrality lasted approximately 2 more seconds. Then he turned back to the stove with the self-possession of a 9-year-old who had decided he was going to handle this with dignity, which was undermined by the fact that he was also very visibly pleased. Mia looked at Serena. Then she looked at Grant. Then she signed with the matter-of-fact certainty that was her most characteristic register. I knew in April, when I came into the kitchen. You were half asleep, Serena said. I'm never that asleep. Grant put his hand over his mouth. His shoulders moved. This family, he said, mostly to himself. Mia caught the word family. She caught most things, and her expression did something that Serena had been watching her face do for 8 years, the thing that happened when Mia encountered something that she'd wanted and had been careful not to expect. A kind of quiet, surprise softening. Gone quickly, replaced by her default composure. But Serena saw it. She always saw it. She crossed the kitchen and sat down beside Mia at the table. She signed, "Is this okay? All of this?" Mia looked at her for a moment. Then she signed, "Mom, I picked him first at the party. Remember?" Serena laughed, the real one. "You did," she said. "You always take too long." A pause, and then something that was, for Mia, the warmest possible version of reassurance. "But you got here." What nobody had anticipated was how naturally the four of them fit. Not smoothly, not without friction, but the way things fit when they're built for the actual dimensions of the space rather than an idealized version of it. There were difficult weeks. A period in September when Tyler struggled at school, a combination of a new teacher who hadn't yet learned his communication rhythms, and a cluster of social dynamics in his class that left him quieter and more withdrawn than usual at home. Grant handled it with the particular competence he brought to Tyler's hard stretches. Present, patient, not making it larger than it was. But it cost him something, the way Tyler's hard stretches always cost him, because he could not fix it entirely, and he had never been fully at peace with the things he couldn't fix for his son. Serena noticed the cost without being asked to notice it. She didn't try to solve it. She had learned over months that Grant's relationship with Tyler's struggles was not a problem for her to enter and manage, the way she entered and managed problems professionally. What she could do was make sure that when he came home from a difficult school meeting or a hard conversation with Tyler's teacher, there was food on the table at the Brooklyn apartment, and the presence of someone who already understood the situation without needing it explained. She had started keeping a key. Tyler had given it to her, which had been Tyler's idea and not Grant's or Serena's, presented on a Saturday morning with the same matter-of-fact gravity he brought to most significant gestures. He'd handed it to her with a speech that consisted of, "In case you need to get in when Dad's not here, Mia knows where we keep the good cereal." Then he'd left the room. Grant had been standing in the hallway when this happened. He'd looked at Serena with an expression she'd come to recognize as the one he wore when Tyler did something that cracked him open a little. He hadn't said anything. She'd closed her hand around the key. The difficult weeks passed, the way difficult weeks did when they were contained inside something larger and more stable than the difficulty. Tyler's teacher adjusted. The social dynamics in his class reshuffled in the way they always reshuffled eventually. Tyler came back to himself, not because the problem had been solved from the outside, but because he had the internal resources of a child who had been well-loved consistently and knew how to find his way back to solid ground. Mia's guitar improved. By October, she could play 2 full progressions from memory, feeling the vibrations against her chest, and she performed them at the kitchen table one Sunday for an audience of 3 humans and 1 dog with a formality that made Tyler bite the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Grant didn't bother hiding that his eyes were full. The second Christmas gala at Halstead Capitol fell on a Friday in mid-December, 1 year and 3 days after the first one. The ballroom was the same, the chandeliers were the same, $300,000 of decorations, the same orchestra, the same view of Midtown at night from 42 floors up. But almost nothing else was what it had been. The accessibility division had reached every department. 14 employees had completed ASL training through the company's new internal program. Not fluency, but enough functional vocabulary to make a meaningful attempt. The catering staff had been briefed on the event's accessible communication protocols. The event program included visual cues for every segment of the evening. The orchestra's conductor had worked with Grant's team on timing and lighting adjustments that gave deaf and hard-of-hearing guests the physical and visual context for music they couldn't hear. Iris was there. She had brought her husband and her sister, both hearing, and all 3 of them had been greeted by a junior staff member who signed a welcome before switching to spoken English. Iris had looked at Grant across the room when this happened and had done something small with her hand. Not quite a wave, not quite a sign, something in between, that he understood completely. The 6 deaf and hard-of-hearing employees were not navigating the evening around its edges. They were just at the party. Grant stood across the room from the doorway where Serena was receiving guests, wearing a charcoal suit that Serena had told him, without preamble, suited him better than the gray one. He was not invisible. He was not performing visibility either. I was simply present in the room in the way he was present in most rooms now. Steadily, without apology, taking up the space that was his. Mia and Tyler arrived with Serena's assistant, who had escorted them up from the lobby. Tyler had worn a button-down shirt under protest and was already looking for the dessert table with the focused determination of a 10-year-old with clear priorities. Mia had worn a blue dress that she had chosen herself and had paired with her favorite sneakers, which Serena had decided was not a battle worth having, and which Mia knew she'd decided this and had loved her for it. Mia came into the ballroom and stopped. She looked up. The chandelier was there, exactly as it had been last year. But the room was different. She could feel the difference before she could identify it. Not in any sound, because sound was not her measure of a room, but in the visual frequency of the space. People were signing to one another. Not many, not everywhere, but scattered through the crowd in ways that made the room feel like it included her instead of existing alongside her. A junior employee crouched down to her eye level and signed, "Hi, I'm Jamie. I've been learning ASL for 3 months. I'm not very good yet, but I wanted to say welcome." Mia looked at Jamie with the evaluating directness that was entirely her. Then she signed back, "Your hand shape for welcome is a little off, but you said it right." Jamie blinked, then laughed. "Can you show me?" Jamie signed. And Mia, 8 years old and wearing blue sneakers at a black tie event, stood in the middle of the ballroom and taught a company employee the correct hand shape for welcome. Grant watched this from across the room. He watched Mia's hands move with the natural authority of a child operating in her first language, instructing an adult who was genuinely trying to learn. He watched the adult receive the correction without embarrassment, practice it twice, and then use it again with the evident pleasure of someone who had gotten something right. He thought about a little girl counting chandelier lights. He thought about the distance between that girl and this one. Same girl, same chandeliers, different room. Not because the room had changed physically, because the room had been asked to change, because someone had looked at what was missing and then spent a year building it. He thought, this is why you do the work. Not for the signed contracts or the board approvals or the professional acknowledgement, though those things were real and mattered. For this. For a 9-year-old's hands moving correctly in a room that hadn't known her language a year ago. Serena appeared beside him. She had finished receiving guests and had crossed the room with the same directness she brought to everything, and she stood next to him and looked at where Mia was still holding court with Jamie, who had now acquired 2 colleagues also learning the correct hand shape for welcome. "She's teaching half your staff," Grant said. "They need it," Serena said. They stood side by side and watched their daughter. And she was their daughter, in all the ways that mattered and some that were still becoming official. Hold the attention of 3 adults in a ballroom full of powerful people, and felt the particular pride of parents watching a child be completely herself in a room that finally had room for it. Tyler materialized at Grant's elbow with a plate that suggested the dessert table had been located and assessed comprehensively. "This is better than last year," he signed, with the dessert plate as supporting evidence. "You weren't here last year," Grant said. "I know, but I can tell." "He's not wrong," Serena said. Tyler looked at both of them with the expression he'd been wearing since August, the one that meant he was pleased with how things had turned out and was managing to be only moderately smug about having approved of the situation early. Then he spotted someone across the room he recognized from the building and went to investigate, leaving the 2 of them standing together in the noise and warmth of the evening. Mia found them later. The party had reached its comfortable middle, the orchestra playing, people moving between clusters. The evening, that quality of warmth that came from a gathering that was actually working. Mia had made her rounds, had signed with 7 people to varying degrees of success and patience, had eaten the desserts Tyler had cataloged for her, and had spent 20 minutes sitting with Iris, who signed well enough now for a genuine conversation, and who had told Mia, in ASL, that Mia's mother had changed her year. Mia had received this information with the gravity it deserved. She came back to Grant and Serena and took up a position between them, which had become her characteristic location in group settings. Between, belonging to both, organizing the space by simply occupying it. She looked up at the chandelier. The same chandelier she had counted, light by light, a year ago in the silence of her own company while 60 people celebrated around her. She looked at it for a moment, not counting, just looking. Then she looked at Grant, then at Serena. Her hands came up. "This is my family," she signed. She said it the way she said most true things, plainly, without preface, as a report of observable fact. Grant looked at his daughter. The grief that moved through him in that moment was not the sad kind. It was the kind that came from the distance between what you'd feared and what you'd arrived at. The release of a breath held so long you'd stopped knowing it was held. He had spent 6 years believing that the chapter of his life that had mattered most was already written, that the best of him had been spent on missions that were done, and that what remained was the daily work of being present for Tyler, which was enough, which he had told himself was enough because it was the only thing available. He had been wrong. Not about Tyler. Tyler was and would always be the center of everything. But the idea that the center was the totality, that love was a fixed quantity that you spent in one direction and had nothing left of, that had been wrong. He understood this now in the way he understood things that had arrived through experience rather than reasoning, completely, in his body, without argument. He crouched in front of Mia, not the way he'd crouched in front of a lonely child at a Christmas party a year ago, the way a father crouched in front of his daughter. He signed, "You are my family too." Mia studied his face for a moment with her particular accuracy. Then she turned to Serena. Serena was looking at them both and was not doing anything about the fact that her eyes were full, which was unusual for her and which she had decided sometime in the past year to stop managing quite so tightly in context that earned it. She crouched too. She looked at her daughter and she signed, with Dara's grammar, with a year of consistent practice, with the hands of a woman who had finally stopped outsourcing the most important language in her life. She signed, "I love you," slowly, clearly. Hers. Mia's face did the thing it had done since she was very small, the thing only Serena could fully recognize. The look of a child who had received exactly what she needed in exactly the form she could receive it. Then Mia looked at Grant. Serena looked at Grant. He was already looking at her. She repeated the sign. For a moment, the ballroom existed around them and had nothing to do with them. The orchestra, the 60 guests, the chandeliers, the city outside the glass. And Grant Mercer, former Navy SEAL, maintenance worker, father, man who had learned to hold a lot without showing it, felt something leave him that had been present so long it had the weight of weather. He signed back, "I love you." Mia watched this exchange with the expression of a child who had arranged a great deal of this without anyone asking her to, and who was satisfied with how it had come out. She signed, "Now can we go look at the desserts Tyler found?" They both laughed. They stood up together, all three of them, and Tyler was already somewhere near the dessert table, and Biscuit was at home on the couch, technically not allowed, but definitely on the couch. And the year that had been, the hard and honest and accumulating year of it, settled into something they could carry forward. They married the following spring, small ceremony. The people who mattered, which was not very many people relative to the life Serena Halstead was publicly known to live, and which was exactly the right number. Mia wore the blue sneakers again. Nobody argued with her. Tyler stood beside his father and had prepared a sign, a short one, practiced for a week, that he delivered to Serena at the moment the officiant asked if anyone had words to offer. He stood up, 9 years old, in a jacket that fit better than the one from the gala, and he signed, "My dad smiles more now. Thank you for that." There was not a dry eye in the small room. Grant had to look at the ceiling for a moment. Serena signed back to Tyler, "So does my daughter. We're even." What they built after that was not a perfect thing. It was not the assembled ideal of any story, two broken families fitted cleanly together into one functional whole. It was messier and more specific than that. There were weeks when the logistics of 2 schools and 2 schedules and 1 dog and a demanding company were genuinely difficult. There were adjustments that took longer than expected. There were evenings when Grant came home from a hard day and Serena came home from a hard day, and they were both too tired to be their best versions. And the apartment absorbed those evenings the way it absorbed everything. But the children had each other. That held. Tyler had cleared the other half of his bookshelf. Mia's sketchbooks had taken over both sides by November, and Tyler had lodged a formal complaint, and Grant had installed a second shelf, and Mia had claimed that one too. And Tyler had told his father this was unjust, and Grant had told him to negotiate directly with Mia, which Tyler did, and they'd worked it out, and the shelf situation had been renegotiated twice more since then, and this was, Grant felt, exactly how things should go. Serena had reached conversational fluency in ASL by the end of the second year. Not perfect. Dara still found things to correct, but fluent in the way that mattered, fluent enough to be present in her daughter's language without a gap, without delay, without the constant low-level translation lag that had put glass between them for years. Mia still corrected her sometimes. Serena no longer felt the sting of it. She'd come to understand that correction was how Mia offered the language. Here, hold it this way. Now it's yours. The accessibility division became, within 2 years, the most imitated internal program in the financial services sector. 3 companies called, then 6. Then an industry publication wrote about it, and Grant had to give his first interview, which he did with the particular discomfort of a private man doing a public thing, and which he survived, and which he never did again because Serena told him he didn't have to, and he believed her. Iris got promoted. She came to tell Grant before the announcement went out and stood in his office doorway and said, "You asked me what I actually needed. That's the whole thing. That's it." He thought about that for a long time after she left. There was a particular Tuesday evening in the second year, ordinary Tuesday, nothing marked about it, when Serena came home from the office to the apartment that was now hers as much as his, set her bag down, and found Grant and the 2 children on the living room floor in the middle of what appeared to be an extremely competitive card game whose rules had clearly been modified several times during play. Biscuit was positioned at the edge of the game as official referee, which mostly meant he was eating a card that had fallen to the floor. "Biscuit," Grant said without looking up. Biscuit looked at him with the card in his mouth and the expression of a dog who had weighed the situation and made his choice. Mia signed to Serena, "Come play. We're teaching Dad a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" "The kind where he loses," Tyler supplied. Grant looked up at her from the floor. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves were rolled. He had the expression of a man who was losing a card game to 2 children and had made his peace with it. He looked, she thought, exactly like himself. "What was it?" he said. "What was what?" "The lesson that he said." It took her a second, then she knew what he meant. Months ago, in the beginning of things, she had told him that Tyler once said the best thing about Grant was that he talked to him wrong, made mistakes, kept going. That imperfect trying was what love looked like to a child who was paying attention. She sat down on the floor. She picked up the cards Biscuit hadn't eaten. "He said you talked to him wrong," she said. And that was the best thing about you." Grant looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his cards, which were not good, and at his children, who had arranged this entire game in order to beat him, and at the dog, who had destroyed the documentation, and at the woman sitting across from him on the floor of the apartment that was theirs. "Okay," he said. He looked at his cards again. "I'm going to lose this round." "Obviously," Tyler signed, "but I'm going to lose it correctly." Mia tilted her head. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to pay attention to what I got wrong and try again." She looked at him. Then she signed, with the plain accuracy that was her defining quality, the thing that had made her remarkable even at a Christmas party when she was 8 years old and counting chandelier lights and waiting for someone to see her. "That's how you do everything, Dad." And Grant Mercer, who had crossed a crowded room once to crouch in front of a lonely child, who had stood in a corridor and told a billionaire the precise limits of what he knew, who had learned a language in the dark hours after his son went to sleep, and had kept learning and kept showing up, and had rebuilt his entire life, not once, but twice, around the people who needed him. Grant Mercer sat on the floor of his living room and let that word settle into him. Dad. He had been Tyler's dad for years. That was the foundation. That would always be the foundation. But the word had 2 directions now. It reached both ways across the room and held everything he'd built, imperfectly and honestly and without stopping. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole thing. Claude is AI and can